Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a chilling mystery that takes us deep into the heart of a small American town, where 5 kids vanish without a trace on a warm summer afternoon. We're talking about Cedar Grove, a quiet little town tucked away in the rolling hills of Ohio, a place where everyone knows everyone, and nothing ever seems out of the ordinary. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to hear from you all. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year was 1990, and the air in Cedar Grove was thick with summer heat. Children's laughter echoed through the playground of Cedar Grove Elementary as they ran and played beneath the bright sun. The familiar hum of cicadas filled the air, their buzz a constant companion to the town's otherwise peaceful atmosphere. Cedar Grove was the kind of town where the biggest worry was what flavor of ice cream you'd have after school. Little did anyone know that this small town would soon be overshadowed by an unimaginable horror. 5 kids were among those playing that day: Sam, Alex, Lily, Jake, and Emma. They were a tight-knit group, always together, always laughing. The world seemed far away from their bubble of innocence. But on that particular afternoon, and as the bell rang to signal the end of recess, a strange vehicle entered the scene. It was a white van, its windows darkened, parked on the corner of the schoolyard. The children didn't think much of it at first, just a car that might belong to someone visiting the school. But then, the doors of the van slid open, and masked figures emerged. They moved swiftly, almost mechanically, each one grabbing a child with frightening precision. Sam screamed, her voice cutting through the air. But it was too late. They were already being dragged toward the van. The others tried to fight, but they were overpowered. Alex kicked. Jake punched. Emma cried. But the figures were too strong, their grip unyielding. They didn't have a chance. The van doors slammed shut with a loud thud, and in the blink of an eye, it was gone. The sound of its engine faded into the distance, leaving the playground eerily silent, save for the distant chirp of the cicadas. No one saw the children taken, and no one knew where they had gone. Minutes passed before the teachers noticed the children missing. The playground, once full of life, now felt hollow, and a creeping sense of unease spread across the schoolyard. Panic set in as teachers searched frantically, calling for the children, but they were nowhere to be found. The authorities were called. Cedar Grove, normally a place of peace and calm, was now consumed by fear. A search was launched, not just through the town, but across nearby forests and fields. The police were baffled. No footprints, no witnesses, no clues. The van had disappeared without a trace. And just like that, Cedar Grove became a place forever changed. The town that had once felt so safe now felt like a prison, its streets tainted by the fear of the unknown. People whispered, wondering who could have done such a thing, why, and how the town's children could be taken so easily. The case seemed like it might remain unsolved forever. No one could fathom what had truly happened to those 5 children, and for years, Cedar Grove would hold its breath, wondering if they would ever find out. The days that followed the disappearance felt like an endless stretch of dark uncertainty. Cedar Grove was in shock. Parents clung to the hope that the children would be found. But the chances were quickly slipping away. Days turned into weeks, and the police, once optimistic, now faced the grim reality that their leads were running cold. The town's once vibrant playground, where children had laughed and played just a few days ago, stood deserted, an eerie reminder of the vanished lives. The search was thorough, yet it was as though the earth itself had swallowed the children whole. Local authorities called in the FBI, but even with their resources, nothing concrete surfaced. The investigation uncovered no sign of the children, no witnesses, no surveillance footage, and no clues about the white van that had abducted them. Detective Carla Reynolds, head of the Cedar Grove Police Department, stood at the edge of the schoolyard, staring at the empty swing set swaying gently in the breeze. It had been almost a week since the kids had disappeared, and the case felt colder with each passing hour. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. Her instincts told her that there was more to this than a random abduction. This wasn't the work of opportunistic kidnappers looking for ransom. There was something calculated about it, something that didn't sit right. "It's like they vanished into thin air," Reynolds muttered under her breath, clenching her jaw as she watched the empty playground. The whole town felt wrong now, as if the light had dimmed in Cedar Grove. Everyone was on edge, their eyes constantly darting around, afraid of what might be lurking just beyond their view. In the weeks following the disappearance, the police gathered every possible lead, scouring nearby towns, checking with hospitals for any sign of the children, and even bringing in search dogs to cover the forests surrounding Cedar Grove. But nothing. No sign of a struggle, no trace of the van, and no hint of where the children could have gone. It was as if they had been taken by ghosts. The local news broadcasted updates daily, the stories filled with the same empty promises. Search efforts continue. Leads are being pursued. Family members are hopeful. But as time wore on, the hope began to wither. Parents organized candlelight vigils, their faces filled with desperation, their voices pleading for the safe return of their children. Yet the darkness of uncertainty only deepened. The town began to change. People grew distant, their eyes wary, as if something had been stolen from them that could never be returned. The very fabric of Cedar Grove was torn apart, its innocence shattered. The whispering rumors began to swirl. Had the kids been taken by a stranger? Was it someone from the town? Could it be someone they all knew? Detective Reynolds, exhausted from the constant pressure, stayed late at the police station one night, going over the case files again. Her mind was clouded with frustration. She couldn't understand why the children were taken, why 5 lives had been stolen without any clear motive. Every theory she entertained fell short. The longer the case went unsolved, the more her doubts crept in. And then, just when she thought there was nowhere else to turn, she received a call. The voice on the other end was distorted, crackling with static. But the words that came through were enough to make her blood run cold. "I know where the kids are," the voice said, calm and unemotional, as though it were just another piece of information to pass along. "And I can prove it." The call was over before Reynolds could respond. The phone just went dead. Shaking, she sat back in her chair, staring at the receiver. What kind of sick game was this? Who would call the police and say something like that? Was it a prank, or had they finally reached a break in the case? With her heart pounding, she picked up the phone again, dialing the number that had come up on the caller ID, but there was no answer. As days passed, the silence from the mysterious caller began to weigh heavily on Reynolds. She couldn't shake the feeling that the person who called knew more than they were letting on. But if the kids were still alive, where were they? And why hadn't anyone noticed anything strange? The search continued, but as the weeks turned into months, the hope for their return began to fade. The media coverage started to dwindle, and the case became another unsolved mystery in a town that refused to give up. But deep down, Reynolds knew that somewhere, buried under the darkness, was the truth waiting to be uncovered. The air in Cedar Grove was thick with unanswered questions, the kind that gnawed at people's hearts, leaving them restless and cold. It had been months since the 5 children vanished from the playground, and every new day felt like a fresh layer of ash falling onto a once vibrant community. Detective Carla Reynolds had tried everything she could think of, but every lead led to a dead end. The case was colder than a winter night, and the town's hope had long since evaporated into the fog of uncertainty. But the truth about where the children had gone, the truth that no one had imagined, was far darker than anyone could have anticipated. It wasn't just about a random abduction. The children weren't taken for ransom or to fulfill some twisted personal vendetta. They had been taken for something far worse. Their captors didn't want money. They wanted their organs. In a facility deep beneath the surface, hidden in plain sight in a desolate industrial area miles from Cedar Grove, the children were being held captive. The place was quiet at first glance, its facade unassuming, but inside it was a stark, clinical world, entirely cut off from the life above. The children woke up to find themselves locked in cold, sterile room, disoriented and terrified. Their heads ached, and their bodies felt heavy as though they had been drugged. The faint scent of antiseptic and bleach clung to the air, and the bright fluorescent lights above burned their eyes. There was no comfort here, no warmth, only the chilling realization that they had been taken for something far worse than they could have imagined. Sam, the oldest of the group, was the first to stir. Her heart was pounding in her chest, her breath short and shallow as she tried to make sense of the situation. She looked around, her eyes adjusting to the sterile white walls, the metal gurneys, and the flickering fluorescent lights above. "Where are we?" Alec's voice was soft, shaky, as he rubbed his eyes. "What happened?" "I don't know," Sam whispered, fear gripping her as she tried to sit up. "We were at school, and now we're here." She glanced around the room, her mind racing, trying to piece together what was going on. But the more she thought, the more confused she became. "Sam, what if—" Emma's voice cracked, and she choked back tears. "What if we're never going to see our families again?" Sam clenched her fists. She refused to let herself break down. She refused to let them see her fear. Not when they needed her to be strong. "We will get out of here," Sam said, her voice firm. "I promise. We just need to stay calm." She stood, the cold metal table beneath her a constant reminder of where they were, somewhere far from home. She moved cautiously to the door and tested the handle. Locked. Of course. But it wasn't just the doors they needed to worry about. It was the people who ran this place. They weren't ordinary criminals. They were a part of a vast underground network, one that smuggled human organs to those willing to pay the highest price. And the children, they were the perfect victims. Healthy, young, and with organs that would be in high demand. There were others, too, adults, people who had been here for years, waiting to be harvested, waiting to be sold. Some of them were just as scared as the children. Others were broken, having long since lost the will to escape. But Sam knew they couldn't afford to give in. They had to escape. The first few days were a blur of confusion and fear. The kids tried to talk to the others, tried to make sense of what was happening, but they received little information. Most of the people they spoke to were too terrified to speak, too numb to care. But every now and then, Sam overheard snippets of conversation from the medical staff talk of clients, donors, and extractions. Her blood ran cold. They were here to be used, to be taken apart, piece by piece, for the highest bidder. Their lives didn't matter. They were just products on a shelf, waiting to be sold. But Sam wasn't going to let that happen. She couldn't. "Sam, what do we do?" Alex asked one night, his voice barely a whisper. "What if we can't get out?" Sam's eyes narrowed with resolve. "We get out, Alex. We have to, and we will." But as the days passed, Sam's plan began to take shape. She knew they couldn't escape on their own. The guards were too well armed, too well trained. But there were weak spots. There were gaps in the system, places where the guards let their guard down. She just needed to find them. She began to study the routines of the staff when they changed shifts, when they left the rooms unguarded, when the lights dimmed at night. Every detail was important. Every movement could be the key to their escape. One evening, after a long day of listening to the whispers of the other prisoners and watching the guards from her cell, Sam had an idea. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She would test the lock on the door. Maybe it would open with enough pressure. Or maybe, just maybe, she could get the door open enough for them to sneak out. That night, as the facility descended into a rare, Uneasy silence. Sam moved quietly to the door. She placed her hands around the cold metal handle. Her breath slow, steady. She twisted. Nothing. She twisted again. And again. Still nothing. Frustrated, she kicked the door softly, cursing under her breath. But then she froze. Something had shifted. Just the faintest bit, and a glimmer of hope flickered in her chest. The door wasn't locked tight. It was just stuck. A plan was beginning to form. A dangerous, life-risking plan, but one that might just be their only shot at survival. The days felt longer as Sam stood by the door, listening to the echoes of distant footsteps. She could feel the weight of every second pressing on her chest. If she hesitated now, it could all be over. But there was something in her, a fire that refused to be extinguished. Even in the face of such darkness, this was it. This was the moment. With a deep breath, she gripped the door handle once more, her fingers slick with sweat, her heart racing in her throat. Slowly, she twisted the handle again, this time with more force. The faintest click resonated in the quiet room, followed by a slight give in the door. Sam's pulse surged, but she held herself still, not daring to make a sound. She glanced over at the others. They were all asleep, or pretending to sleep, knowing that any noise could attract unwanted attention. But even in the stillness, Sam could see the tension in their faces, the silent plea in their eyes. They all knew what was at stake, and they all knew the risks. But they also knew that without action, they were doomed to become another statistic, just another set of organs harvested for profit. A sharp click echoed once more as the door loosened. Sam held her breath and gently pushed it open, inch by inch, until it was wide enough for her to slip through. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips as she stepped cautiously into the narrow hallway, glancing back at her friends. They hadn't noticed yet, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath with her. She had done it. She was out. But Sam wasn't stupid. She knew this was just the beginning. Getting out of the room was one thing. Getting out of the entire facility was another. The hallways were dark, lit only by dim, flickering lights that seemed to come from nowhere. The silence was oppressive. But it wasn't the kind of silence that felt safe. It was the kind of silence that made every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light, seem deafening. Sam moved quickly but quietly, making her way down the hall, sticking close to the walls to avoid detection. She had no plan for what came next, only the burning desire to get as far away from this place as possible. Every sound made her heart race. Every shadow seemed to move, and she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, anyone, was watching. Turning a corner, she stopped dead in her tracks. At the end of the hall, she saw a guard, one of the men who had been overseeing the children during their brief times outside the cell. He was sitting at a desk, his back turned to her, engrossed in a newspaper. She was almost invisible in the shadows. This was it, the first test. With a sharp intake of breath, she silently moved forward, her footsteps soft against the cold floor. She could feel her pulse quicken, the adrenaline rushing through her veins, but she kept her focus. She was almost there, just a few steps from the door at the far end of the hall. And then, without warning, the guard shifted in his chair. Sam froze. Time seemed to stretch. Her breath caught in her throat, but she didn't move. She held herself completely still, her back pressed to the wall, praying he wouldn't hear her. The seconds felt like hours, but the guard didn't look back. Instead, he shifted again, this time reaching for a radio on his desk. Sam didn't wait to see what he was doing. This was her moment. She darted toward the door. The handle was cold against her hand, and she twisted it quickly. The door opened, and she slipped inside, closing it just as the sound of the guard's voice echoed down the hall. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't dare look back. Inside, Sam found herself in what appeared to be a small storage room. Boxes lined the walls, and old medical equipment cluttered the corners. There was a faint smell of chemicals in the air, but none of that mattered. She had made it this far. She quickly scanned the room for an exit, but there was none. No windows, no clear way out. Her mind raced as she frantically searched the shelves, hoping to find anything that could lead her to a way out of this nightmare. Her eyes settled on a fire escape ladder hanging from the ceiling. Her pulse spiked. This was it. This could be her chance. But she couldn't do this alone. She had to get the others out. The whole reason she'd risked everything was for them. Sam quickly grabbed a box and used it to prop the ladder open. She climbed up with the quiet urgency of someone who had nothing left to lose. Every movement felt calculated, every step a step closer to freedom. But the door to the room suddenly rattled. Someone was coming. She hesitated, her hand on the final rung of the ladder, her mind screaming to go, but her body frozen in place. If she moved now, they'd catch her. She could already hear the footsteps nearing the door. And then, through the silence, came the sound of voices. Sam turned sharply to the ladder and scrambled up, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She could hear the men outside, talking about something. Sam strained to listen, holding her breath as she slowly inched up. The voices grew louder. "Check the storage rooms. They're bound to hide there. Don't let them escape." The words hit her like a blow to the chest, and her blood ran cold. They were looking for her, but she wasn't going to let them catch her. Not today. Sam's hands tightened on the ladder as she pulled herself upward, her body shaking with the effort. She reached the top and pushed open the hatch with all her strength. The cold night air hit her face as she emerged into the darkness, the world outside now stretching before her like a vast, open space. But she wasn't alone yet. Not yet. She had to go back. She had to get the others. Her heart thundered in her chest as she glanced down at the building. There was no turning back now. This was their only chance. The cool night air was a stark contrast to the sterile, suffocating atmosphere of the facility. As Sam's feet touched the cold metal of the roof, she felt the first real rush of freedom she'd experienced since that fateful day. It felt surreal. The world outside, dark and vast, stretched endlessly before her, so close, yet so far. The wind whipped through her hair as she peered into the distance, scanning for any sign of escape. But it wasn't enough just to escape. She needed to get back for her friends. They had to get out, together. Her breath was shallow as she quickly crouched low, moving toward the edge of the building. The fire escape was close, and if she could make it to the alleyway below, she might be able to disappear into the darkness. But in the back of her mind, the doubt lingered. She wasn't alone. She couldn't be. Everything hinged on her getting back to the others. She couldn't leave them behind, not after everything they'd been through. They deserved more than to rot away in that facility, waiting to be sold off like cattle. She swallowed her fear and began moving toward the ladder at the side of the building. Her every movement was deliberate. No noise, no sudden jerks, just calm, measured steps. But as she reached for the first rung, the door behind her creaked. Sam froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Had they found her already? Her first instinct was to run. She needed to keep moving, keep herself hidden. But she couldn't leave the building yet, not without the others. The door creaked again, louder this time, followed by voices. Sam's blood ran cold as she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming closer. The guards were coming. She hadn't been quick enough. There was no time to hesitate now. She scrambled down the fire escape, her fingers numb from the cold metal. Every movement was rushed, desperate. She could hear them behind her, getting closer, their voices rising in urgency. She didn't know how long she had, but she knew she couldn't outrun them forever. Sam reached the bottom of the fire escape, her feet hitting the ground with a dull thud. She barely had time to steady herself before she heard one of the guards shout. They'd spotted her. Her heart leaped into her throat as she broke into a sprint, the cold night air burning her lungs. The alleyway stretched before her, offering a small glimmer of hope. She had to make it to the street, get out into the open where there might be a chance to disappear. But the sound of footsteps grew louder, She was being chased. They were gaining on her. She darted around a corner, weaving between shadows, praying that the cover of darkness would be enough to hide her. The narrow alley was filled with the scent of damp concrete and old garbage. But that didn't matter. She just needed to get to the street, to safety. Her legs burned with effort, but she refused to slow down. Sam pushed herself harder, her breath ragged, her muscles screaming in protest. But just as she neared the end of the alley, something slammed into her side, sending her crashing to the ground. Pain shot through her body as she twisted to see a guard looming over her. His face twisted in a cruel grin. "You're not going anywhere," he sneered, his hand gripping her arm tightly. Sam struggled, her heart racing in her chest as she kicked and punched, but it was no use. The guard was too strong. "You think you can escape the man-spat? This place is built to keep people like you in. There's no getting out. Not alive." Sam's mind raced. She couldn't let him take her back. She couldn't go back to that hellhole. She had to find a way out. With a burst of strength she didn't know she had, Sam twisted her body, slamming her knee into the guard's abdomen. He staggered back, momentarily stunned, and that was all the opening Sam needed. She scrambled to her feet, adrenaline surging through her as she made a run for it. But the guard was fast eating, and he was close. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat ringing in her ears as she ran through the alley. Desperate for freedom, she heard the guard's footsteps behind her, felt the weight of his presence growing nearer with every step. Sam turned another corner, hoping to lose him, but she was running out of places to hide. The streets were quieter now, the silence broken only by the sound of her breath and the pounding of her heart. She needed to think. She needed a plan. She ducked into a narrow street, barely wide enough to fit her shoulders. Her lungs burned as she tried to stay ahead. But the sound of the guard's pursuit was unrelenting. She was running out of time. And then, just when she thought she couldn't run any longer, she spotted a truck parked on the side of the street, its engine running. A glimmer of hope, a chance. She sprinted toward it, ignoring the pain in her legs and the fear that gnawed at her gut. If she could just get inside, get away. But as her fingers grazed the door handle, the guard's voice rang out behind her, a cruel reminder of how close he was. "You're not getting away, girl," he yelled. Sam's heart raced as she swung open the truck door and slid inside, slamming it shut behind her. Her hand reached for the ignition, her fingers trembling as she twisted the key. The truck roared to life, and she slammed her foot on the gas, peeling out of the alleyway and onto the open street. The guard's voice faded into the distance, but Sam didn't look back. She couldn't. She had no idea where she was going. But she didn't care. All that mattered was that she was free, at least for now. But as the truck sped through the streets of the quiet town, one thought nagged at the back of Sam's mind. The others, they were still trapped, and no matter how far she ran, she couldn't leave them behind. Sam's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. The truck swerved through the narrow streets of Cedar Grove, the headlights casting long shadows across the empty road. Her heart still pounded, each beat reminding her that she had barely escaped. But she couldn't focus on the relief yet. Her mind was consumed with the others, her friends. They were still locked in that place, still at the mercy of the people who had taken them. She couldn't shake the image of their faces, their fear. It was all too much, and the guilt that had settled in her chest like a stone weighed heavier with every passing second. As she drove, the city lights began to blur, the hum of the engine the only sound that filled her ears. The truck's tires screamed against the asphalt as she pushed it harder, desperate to get as far away from that hellhole as possible. But the distance between freedom and her friends felt impossible. What was she supposed to do? She couldn't go back. She couldn't risk getting caught again. But how could she leave them behind? It was a question that tore at her mind with every turn she made. They needed her. She needed them. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she nearly swerved off the road in surprise. For a brief moment, she thought it might be one of the kids reaching out. But as she pulled the phone from her pocket, her stomach dropped. It was a message from an unknown number. "We have them. If you want to see them again, you know what to do." The words hit her like a physical blow, her heart stopping for a moment. They were still alive. They were still there, waiting. But what did they mean by "you know what to do"? Sam's hands shook as she read the message again, but the phone slipped from her fingers and clattered to the truck floor. Tears blurred her vision as she forced herself to pull over to the side of the road. She wasn't safe yet. She couldn't just give in to the overwhelming fear that threatened to consume her. She had to think. She had to stay calm. The truck sat idle in the darkness, its engine running as Sam sat with her head resting against the steering wheel, trying to control her breathing. She couldn't stay like this. She needed a plan. But where could she even begin? There were no easy answers. No quick solutions. But then a thought crept into her mind, a dangerous thought. She didn't want to believe it, but the more she thought about it, the more it seemed like the only way forward. Alex. He was the one who had been with her the most in those early days. They had grown up together, shared stories, laughed, and played. But what if he had betrayed them all? What if he had been in on it from the beginning? Her mind raced as the possibility sank in. She remembered the strange way Alex had been acting in the days leading up to their abduction, the way he'd seemed distracted, almost distant at times. She recalled his odd, nervous glances whenever the guards were around, his reluctance to speak up when the group was planning their escape. Was it possible that Alex had played a part in their captivity, that he had known more than he let on? The thought made her stomach churn, but it felt like it made sense. She didn't want to believe it, but the pieces fit together in a way she couldn't ignore. She had to know the truth, even if it meant confronting him. Sam slammed her hand on the truck's dashboard in frustration. She wasn't ready for this, wasn't ready to face the possibility that one of them could have turned on the others. But the evidence was there, and she couldn't deny it any longer. The truck rumbled back to life as she put it in gear, her determination growing stronger. She had to go back. She had to find Alex and confront him. If he was involved, if he had betrayed them, then she needed to know. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty. But Sam was no longer afraid. She had come this far, and no matter what, she wasn't going to stop. She was going back to Cedar Grove, back to the place she had fled from, back to the darkness. But this time, she would be ready. As she neared the outskirts of town, Sam's phone buzzed again, jerking her from her thoughts. She hesitated for a moment before checking the screen. This time, the message was different. "Don't go back. If you do, you'll never leave again." The message sent a chill down her spine. But Sam wasn't about to be intimidated. She had come too far to turn back now. With her jaw set in determination, she pressed the gas pedal, the engine roaring as the truck surged forward into the night. Whatever waited for her back in Cedar Grove, she was ready. The town was still silent, as if waiting for something to break the stillness. Sam's heart raced as she approached the building she'd escaped from, knowing she was about to face whatever dark truth lay hidden in the shadows. Her mind, clouded with fear and adrenaline, refused to entertain the idea of failure. The doors had closed on her once, but they weren't going to stop her this time. She had to find the others. She had to find Alex and uncover the truth. Because in the end, they would either escape together, or they would all be lost. As the truck screeched to a halt outside the facility, Sam took a long, shaky breath. She could hear the faint hum of the building in the distance and an almost ominous sound. This was it. The time for hiding was over. Now, she was going to face what she had been running from all along. The night was eerily quiet as Sam parked the truck a few hundred yards from the entrance to the facility. The building loomed in the distance like a ghost, its silhouette dark against the dim sky. The feeling of dread that crept over her as she stepped out of the truck was palpable, a chill that crawled under her skin and made her bones feel cold. But she couldn't back down now. There was no going back. Her body trembled, not just from fear, but from the raw determination that had driven her this far. Her friends, her family were still inside, still trapped, and no matter how dark things seemed, Sam knew this was her last chance to save them. She moved quickly, blending into the shadows of the alleyways and empty streets. Her senses were on high alert, every crack in the pavement, every distant sound setting her nerves alight. She had learned quickly that in this town, nothing could be trusted, not even the quiet. She crept closer to the facility, her breath shallow and controlled. The night sky above was free of clouds, the moon casting a faint light on the ground as she approached the chain-link fence that surrounded the building. She had spent hours studying the layout of the area, memorizing every movement, every shift of the guards. Tonight, she had the advantage she was no longer the scared girl who had been dragged in there. She was someone else now. Someone who knew exactly what was at stake. With a practiced ease, she pulled herself up the fence, using the old rusted wire as a foothold. Her muscles strained with the effort. But she refused to stop. She had already escaped once. There was no way she was going to let this place claim her again. Her fingers grazed the sharp metal as she climbed. But the pain was nothing compared to the urgency she felt. Finally, she reached the top, her heart pounding in her chest as she straddled the edge of the fence. Below her, the facility stretched out, silent, foreboding. She could see the faint glow of security lights sweeping across the ground. She had to time this perfectly. If she moved too quickly, the guards would spot her. But if she hesitated for even a second, it would all be over. She dropped to the ground with a soft thud, landing lightly on her feet. Her eyes scanned the area for any signs of movement. The shadows seemed to swallow her up as she moved stealthily toward the back entrance of the building. Everything in Sam screamed at her to run and to get away, to leave this place behind. But she couldn't. Not when her friends were still inside. Not when the clock was ticking and the stakes were so high. The building loomed ahead, and a cold, sterile structure that held the secrets of everything she had feared. It was a place that had taken so much from her, from all of them. But it was also a place that could be their salvation. If she could just get in, if she could just reach them. She reached the back door and carefully tested the handle. It was unlocked. Sam's breath caught in her throat. This was it. She stepped inside, her footsteps soft against the floor, every inch of her body alert. She knew the risks of being caught. She knew what would happen if she was discovered. But there was no turning back now. Inside, the walls were as cold and sterile as she remembered, the flickering fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Sam crept along the hallways, her eyes darting nervously to every corner, every door. She could hear faint murmurs in the distance, the sound of guards talking, the hum of machinery. But the deeper she went, the quieter it became, the more isolated she felt. Suddenly, she stopped, her heart hammering in her chest. A door at the end of the hallway was ajar, and through the crack, Sam could see figures moving inside. She took a deep breath, pushing away the fear that threatened to swallow her whole. She had no time to waste. Her legs felt like lead as she moved toward the door, her every step a silent prayer that she wouldn't be seen. She paused just before it, holding her breath as she listened. The voices inside were getting louder. There was no turning back now. She slowly pushed the door open, the creaking sound making her blood run cold. But the room on the other side was dark, and the figures were too far away to notice her. Sam slipped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. She was in a storage room, rows of metal shelves filled with what looked like medical equipment. But there was no time to examine it. She had to find her friends. She crept deeper into the room, trying to stay low. The adrenaline surged again, fueling her movements as she pushed aside a stack of boxes and carefully peered around the corner. In the distance, she could make out what looked like a control center. There, behind a desk, sat a lone figure. He was absorbed in his work, completely unaware of Sam's presence. This was her chance? Sam slipped past him, moving quickly but quietly, her heart thundering in her chest as she finally reached a door marked holding. She hesitated for a split second, every nerve in her body on high alert. What if this was a trap? What if she had walked right into the heart of their operation? She shook the thought from her head. No, she couldn't think like that. She had come too far. With a deep breath, Sam turned the handle and opened the door. There, in the dim light, were her friends. They were sitting on the cold floor, their faces haggard, their eyes wide with fear. But when they saw her, a flicker of recognition passed through their expressions. "Hope, Sam," Lily whispered, her voice hoarse. "You came back." "I'm getting you out of here," Sam said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're leaving now." But before they could move, a voice behind her made Sam freeze in place. "Going somewhere?" The voice came from the shadow, cold and threatening, making Sam's blood run cold. She didn't dare to turn around. Every instinct in her body screamed for her to run, to take her friends and flee, but her legs felt frozen to the ground. She had come so far, and now it seemed like she was about to be caught in the worst possible moment. Slowly, she turned, her heart pounding in her chest. Standing in the doorway was a figure, a man, tall and imposing, dressed in a dark uniform, his face obscured by a mask, the same mask the guards had worn when they took her and the others. Sam's breath caught in her throat as her eyes locked onto his, her mind racing with possibilities. "Did you really think you could escape?" "Girl," the man sneered, his voice low and menacing. "Did you think we wouldn't be watching?" Sam tried to swallow the lump in her throat, forcing herself to remain calm. She couldn't let fear overtake her now, not when the others were depending on her. "You're not taking them back," she said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. "We're leaving." The man laughed, a hollow, unsettling sound that echoed in the small room. He stepped forward, his shoes clicking against the concrete floor. "You think you're the first to try? We've had countless others just like you. They all think they can outsmart us, escape, but you're just another puppet in our game?" Sam's mind raced as the man took another step closer. Behind her, her friends were watching, their faces pale and filled with fear, but there was a flicker of hope in their eyes. They were still alive. They were still here, and that was all that mattered. "We're not just going to disappear," she said, louder now, more forceful. "We're not your property." The man's expression faltered for a moment, and that was all Sam needed. In a flash, she grabbed the nearest object she could find, a small metal rod lying on the table, and swung it at the man's head. The blow landed with a satisfying crack, sending him stumbling back. For a moment, he faltered, stunned. But it wasn't enough. He quickly regained his balance, a furious expression spreading across his face. "You're making a big mistake, girl," he growled. "You have no idea what you're up against." As he lunged toward her, Sam didn't wait. She didn't have time to think about the consequences. She had to act. She turned and grabbed the door handle, pulling it open with all her strength. The sound of the man's footsteps behind her pushed her to move faster. "Run!" Sam yelled to the others, her voice sharp with urgency. Her friends didn't need any further prompting. They scrambled to their feet, their movements slow from exhaustion. But the fear that had paralyzed them for so long had finally broken. They were ready to fight, to survive. They followed Sam down the narrow hallway, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty space. But as they rounded the corner, another guard appeared, blocking their path. Sam's heart sank. They were trapped. The guard stepped forward, his expression grim as he raised his weapon. "Stop," he commanded, his voice firm. Sam's mind raced. She had no weapons left, no tools to fight with, but she wasn't going to let them take her or her friends without a fight. She looked around desperately for anything that could help. Then, just as the guard raised his weapon to strike, there was a loud bang from behind him. The guard froze, his eyes wide with surprise. Sam's breath hitched in her chest. The sound had come from the direction they had just escaped. The guard turned just as the door at the end of the hallway burst open. Another figure appeared, a familiar face. It was Alex. Sam's heart skipped a beat, a mix of confusion and disbelief flooding her. Alex, was it really him? He stepped into the hallway, a gun in his hand, but his face was filled with resolve. His eyes met Sam's. And for a brief moment, there was a flicker of recognition in his gaze, but it was quickly replaced by something else, something darker. "Move," Alex ordered, his voice cold, flat. "I'll handle this." Sam's mind swirled. She couldn't make sense of it. Was this the same Alex who had been with them, the one who had shared their fear, their hopes? Was this the same Alex who had played with them in the yard, laughed, and talked about the future? How had he become a part of this nightmare? How had he become part of the very system that had stolen their lives? But there was no time to ask. Alex's presence in the hallway changed the situation completely. The guard hesitated, and Sam could see the tension in his posture as Alex approached him slowly. "You're not going anywhere," Alex said coldly, his eyes fixed on the guard. The guard took a step back, uncertainty flashing across his face. Sam could see the internal struggle. Alex was one of them. But was he? Was he betraying them? Was this all part of the plan? Alex turned, his eyes never leaving the guard. "Leave," he said, his voice commanding. Without a word, the guard lowered his weapon, his eyes flicking nervously between Sam and Alex. Then he retreated, disappearing into the shadows, leaving the group standing in the corridor, still trying to process what had just happened. Sam stood frozen, staring at Alex. Her mind was in chaos. But she knew one thing: Alex had just saved them. But why? "Alex." Sam whispered, taking a cautious step toward him. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lowered his gun and looked at the group, his face unreadable. "I'll explain everything," he said, his voice low. "But we need to get out of here, now." Sam's mind was still reeling, but there was no time to dwell on questions. They had a chance, just a chance to escape. They ran, together, down the hallway and out into the night, leaving the darkness of the facility behind. But the question lingered in the back of Sam's mind: what had brought Alex to this point? What had changed him? And more importantly, could they trust him now? The cold wind whipped through the streets as Sam and the others ran, their footsteps pounding against the concrete as they fled the facility. The darkness around them seemed endless, the night air thick with tension. They had escaped, but the questions were still there, lingering like shadows, threatening to overwhelm them. Alex's sudden appearance had saved them. But the question of why he was there, as why he had helped them, was gnawing at Sam's mind. They kept moving, their breaths ragged and fast. Sam's legs burned with exertions, but she refused to slow down. She had been through too much to let anything stop her now. Behind them, and the facility loomed, dark and silent. But Sam knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. The authorities would come soon enough, but even with their help, they were still too vulnerable. The truth was out there, hidden in the shadows, and they were about to face it head on. As they rounded a corner, Sam finally glanced back at Alex. He was running just behind them, his eyes darting nervously between them and the dark streets ahead. "What's going on?" Sam asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Why are you helping us? What's really going on here?" Alex's face was a mask of frustration and something deeper: regret, perhaps, or guilt. He slowed slightly, catching up to Sam and turning to face her. "I didn't have a choice," he said quietly, his voice strained. They had leverage. My family, my sister was in danger. They forced me to help them." Sam's heart sank. It all made sense now. Alex's strange behavior, his fear, his reluctance to act. He had been trapped in this nightmare long before they ever were. "I had no idea how far they were willing to go," Alex continued, his eyes flicking to the others. "I thought I was doing the right thing at first, thinking it would be over. But when I saw what they were really doing, when I saw what they were planning to do to you—" He stopped, shaking his head as if trying to shake off the memories. "I couldn't do it anymore. I had to help you. I had to get you out." Sam didn't know what to say. The part of her wanted to yell at him, to scream at him for putting them all in danger. But another part of her understood. They had all been powerless in the face of something so much bigger than them. And now, Alex was trying to make things right. She took a breath, trying to steady herself. "We're not out yet," she said, her voice calmer now. "We have to keep moving. We have to get to the safe house." "The safe house?" Alex asked, his eyes narrowing. "We're not the only ones trying to expose this operation," Sam explained. "There's a group. They've been tracking the trafficking ring for years. We just need to get to them. They'll know what to do." Alex nodded, but Sam could see the doubt in his eyes. The streets of Cedar Grove were eerily quiet, but Sam knew that wouldn't last. The criminals behind this operation would stop at nothing to make sure their secret stayed hidden. They had to keep moving. As they reached a narrow alleyway that led out of the town, Sam stopped abruptly, her senses on high alert. A faint noise echoed in the distant sirens. The authorities, but something was off. The sirens were too far away, too scattered. It wasn't just the police. Someone else was coming. Sam motioned for the others to hide behind the dumpster. They crouched low, holding their breath as they listened. The sirens were getting closer, but they still didn't sound like a normal police chase. This was something else, something more dangerous. Suddenly, a dark SUV screeched to a halt at the end of the alley. The doors flew open, and men dressed in tactical gear spilled out, their weapons drawn. They were moving fast, sweeping the area with military precision. Sam's heart skipped a beat. These weren't police officers. These were mercenaries. They were closing in. "Get down," Sam whispered urgently, pulling the others into a crouch. Her mind raced. There was no way they could fight their way out of this. They needed to get out of the alley. But the only exit was blocked by the mercenaries. Alex's face was pale, his hands shaking as he reached for the gun in his waistband. But Sam stopped him. "No, we can't fight them. We have to wait." The group huddled in silence, their breath shallow and fast as the mercenaries moved past them, searching the alley with expert precision. Sam's mind raced, every second feeling like an eternity. She couldn't help but feel the weight of their situation. If they were caught now, it was over. The mercenaries wouldn't show mercy. They would do whatever it took to stop them from exposing the truth. A shadow passed over them as one of the mercenaries turned toward the dumpster. Sam held her breath, but just as the man stepped forward, a loud noise erupted from the other side of the alley, an explosion. The mercenaries froze for a split second, turning toward the sound. It was enough for Sam. She grabbed the others and motioned for them to move. They sprinted toward the opposite end of the alley, their feet pounding against the pavement. The explosion had caused enough chaos to give them a small window of time to escape. But Sam knew it wouldn't last. They had to get out of town, and fast. As they ran, they could hear the mercenaries shouting behind them, their voices rising in alarm. But Sam's focus remained on one thing: survival. They had come too far to be caught now. They reached the edge of town and spotted a car parked near a wooded area. Without thinking, Sam ran toward it, pulling open the door and jumping inside. The others followed quickly, and Alex slammed the door shut just as the sound of gunfire echoed through the air. The car's engine roared to life, and they sped away, the streets of Cedar Grove fading behind them. But as Sam looked into the rearview mirror, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being hunted. They hadn't escaped. Not yet. But they had one thing a chance. And for now, that was enough. The night seemed to stretch on forever as the car sped down the winding road, the headlights cutting through the darkness. Sam's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white with tension. Her heart still raced, the sound of the gunfire echoing in her ears. But the danger wasn't over. Not yet. They had barely escaped Cedar Grove. And as much as Sam wanted to believe they were safe, the truth was hard to ignore. The mercenaries were still hunting them. And they weren't just hunting them, they were hunting the truth. The truth about what had been happening in Cedar Grove for years. About the trafficking ring that had stolen lives. About the network that had been feeding off the pain and suffering of others. And now, the truth was about to be exposed. The car's tires screeched as Sam took another sharp turn, her eyes scanning the road ahead. They were headed toward the safe house, a place where the authorities had been working in secret to bring down the criminal network. Sam had never been there before, but she trusted the people inside. They had to. Behind her, the others were silent. Alex sat in the passenger seat, his eyes glued to the rearview mirror, his body tense with worry. The others, Jake, Emma, and Lily, were huddled in the back seat, their faces pale, but their eyes filled with something else, hope. "We're almost there," Sam said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just hold on a little longer." Alex didn't respond, his gaze still fixed on the road behind them. Sam could see the doubt in his eyes, the fear that mirrored her own. He was the one who had betrayed them. And while Sam knew he was trying to make things right, she still wasn't sure if she could trust him completely. The lies, the manipulation, it was hard to forget. But now wasn't the time to dwell on it. They had to stay focused. The headlights from a car flashed in the distance, and Sam's heart skipped a beat. They were being followed. "They're catching up," Alex said, his voice tight with panic. "They're getting closer." Sam pressed harder on the accelerator, the engine roaring as the car shot forward. The wind whipped through the cracked windows, and the trees outside blurred in a frenzy of motion, but the car behind them was relentless, staying just a few yards behind. The safe house was near, but it might as well have been miles away. The thought of getting caught now was unbearable. They were so close to freedom, to bringing the truth to light. She couldn't let them lose everything now. "They're still coming," Emma said, her voice shaking. "We can't outrun them forever." "We don't have to," Sam said, her voice calm but filled with determination. She took a sharp right turn, the tires screeching as the car skidded. They were in unfamiliar territory now, but it didn't matter. She was willing to risk it all to make sure they got to the safe house. But the car behind them wasn't backing down. The sound of the engine growing louder made Sam's pulse spike. It was clear they weren't just trying to catch up. They were trying to force them off the road. Sam's grip tightened on the wheel as she veered around another sharp corner. But just as she did, the car behind them slammed into their rear bumper. The impact sent the car spinning. And for a terrifying moment, Sam lost control. The world around her seemed to spin in slow motion as she fought to regain control of the vehicle. Her heart raced as she slammed her foot on the brake, but the car didn't respond. The tires screeched as the vehicle slammed into a ditch, the jarring crash ringing in her ears. They had stopped. The car behind them didn't hesitate. The mercenaries were closing in, their headlights blinding as they pulled up beside them. Sam's heart pounded in her chest as the door to the car opened, the sound of footsteps growing louder. But just as she thought it was over, the sound of sirens broke through the night. The mercenaries froze, their eyes widening in confusion. From behind them, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the street. Police cruisers swarmed into view, cutting off the mercenaries' escape. "Get out of the car now," a voice shouted on. Sam's eyes widened in disbelief. It was the authorities, the real authorities. They had arrived. The mercenaries hesitated for a moment, then scrambled to get back into their cars. No. But it was too late. The police were on them in seconds. Surrounding the vehicles and forcing the mercenaries to surrender. Sam's breath hitched as she slowly got out of the car, her legs unsteady beneath her. The police officer who approached her gave her a brief glance before moving past to secure the situation. But Sam didn't care. The danger had passed. They were safe. She turned back to her friends. They were all alive. They were all still there. They had made it. A figure approached from behind, and Sam's heart skipped a beat. It was Detective Carla Reynolds, the one person who had been relentless in her pursuit of the truth. "I knew you'd come," Sam said, her voice thick with emotion. Detective Reynolds gave her a faint smile, but her eyes were filled with something deeper respect. "Perhaps, or maybe something more. We couldn't have done it without you," the detective said, her voice calm. "You did the right thing. You exposed the truth. You've given us everything we need to shut this down once and for all." Sam felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was finally over. The truth had been revealed. The organ trafficking ring had been exposed, and the criminals who had run it would be brought to justice. But as Sam stood there, looking out at the chaos unfolding around her, a feeling of finality settled within her. It was over, but it had cost them so much. They had survived, but their lives would never be the same. The darkness had lifted, but the scars would remain, and as she looked at her friends, her family, she knew one thing for certain: they were stronger now. They had survived the worst, and now, together, they would rebuild. As the chaos of the moment began to fade into the distance, Sam stood in the silence of the aftermath. The stars above, once a source of wonder, now felt like a distant memory, far removed from the horrors they had just survived. The night felt calm now, but the echoes of the past still lingered in the quiet corners of her mind. They had won, but at what cost? The price of their freedom was steep, and though they had made it out, they would never forget the fear, the pain, the betrayal. The scars would stay with them, but they would heal. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. Sam looked at her friends and her family. They were alive. They were free. And for the first time in what felt like forever, they had the chance to rebuild, to find peace. They had survived. They had fought together. And though the road ahead would never be easy, they had each other. And that was enough.